On the 25th of April 1980, air traffic controller Justo Camin was on duty at Los Rodeos Airport in Tenerife. At 1:18 p.m, he issued an instruction to an incoming British flight to put it into a holding pattern. The instruction was accepted without question, and Justo Camin thought no more about it. He didn't realize that he had made a deadly mistake. By accidentally omitting a single letter from his instruction, he had started a chain of events that would end with the loss of over 100 lives. Dan Air was an airline based in the UK that did a bit of everything: charter flights, cargo flights, passenger flights, and package holidays. The last of these had become incredibly popular with the British public by the 1970s. Customers could buy flights, accommodation, and activities all through one tour operator, which the operator would fulfill by buying discount blocks of seats or even entire flights from airlines like Dan Air. It was a lucrative business. Tenerife was, and remains, a very popular destination with British tourists. The largest of Spain's Canary Islands, it is located just off West Africa. Holidaymakers get to enjoy the warm climate without technically leaving Europe. Given that it's such an ideal holiday destination, tourism is a major part of the economy of Tenerife. The island, and in particular its Los Rodeos airport, had previously found itself the focal point of the world's attention in 1977, when it was the site of the most deadly civilian aviation disaster in history. 2 Boeing 747s collided on the runway, resulting in the death of 583 people. This disaster was attributed to a simple misunderstanding between air traffic control and flight crew, a situation made deadly due to limited visibility. Visibility at Los Rodeos was often poor. The airport's location, 600 meters or 2,000 feet above sea level, meant that it was prone to sudden changes in weather, which often included dense clouds and fog. Another factor in this earlier disaster was the lack of radar at the airport, which meant that the only way that air traffic control could locate planes was by tracking their reports and plotting their routes on pieces of paper. This may seem like a dated approach, but it was quite common in smaller European airports at the time. For these reasons, Tenerife was thought of as a potentially tricky airport for pilots, but it was not seen as one of the worst in Europe. It was an experienced flight crew on board Dan Air Flight 1008 on the 25th of April 1980. 50-year-old Captain Arthur Whelan had more than 15,000 flight hours and had flown to Tenerife 58 times previously. The first officer on board was 33-year-old Michael Firth, who had around 3,500 flight hours and had flown to Tenerife 9 times. They were joined by flight engineer Raymond Carey, also 33 years old, who had more than 3,000 flight hours but had never flown to Tenerife before. Dan Air Flight 1008 took off from Manchester Airport at 9:22 a.m. local time. At 1:14 p.m, as they approached Tenerife through thick fog, the crew contacted Tenerife Airport Approach Control. They were informed that due to a change in the wind direction, they were due to land on runway 12, rather than runway 30 as they normally would. The runway was unfamiliar to Captain Whelan, but given his level of experience, this was really no cause for concern. The normal protocol for landing on runway 12 is to fly to the north of the Tango Foxtrot November radio beacon at the northern end of the island, then head further inland to the Foxtrot Papa beacon, before heading out to sea, turning around, and approaching the runway from that direction. This was the initial plan for Flight 1008. However, after receiving their instructions, they realized they were behind another plane, Iberia Flight 711. This was a turboprop, a hybrid jet and propeller aircraft which was traveling much slower than the Dan Air Boeing 727. As the situation stood, they would soon catch up with and get dangerously close to the slower plane. The crew reported their position at 1:18 p.m. as they passed the Tango Foxtrot November beacon. The air traffic controller at Tenerife Airport that day was 34-year-old Justo Camin, a man who may have been somewhat distracted, as he had very recently found out that his mother had terminal cancer. Whether because of this distraction or for another reason, he was surprised that the Dan Air flight had reached the beacon so quickly, and that it had gotten so close to the slower Iberia flight. To deal with this situation, he decided to put Flight 1008 into a holding pattern. This would buy some time so that the Iberia plane in front could land and vacate the runway. There was a problem, though. All of the usual holding patterns were designed for the more commonly used runway 30. As such, he would need to create a new holding pattern for the Dan Air flight to use. He planned a route that would see the Dan Air flight turn right at the Foxtrot Papa beacon and head out to sea, then turn back towards the island and enter a holding pattern by making a series of repeated left-hand turns. They could fly loops of this pattern until the runway was clear for them to land. He conveyed the following message to the crew. Roger, the standard holding over Foxtrot Papa is inbound heading 150, turn to the left. Call you back shortly. There was a tiny error in this message. What Mr. Kamin should have said was turns to the left, to indicate that once they were inbound back towards the Foxtrot Papa beacon, they could start a holding pattern that consisted of repeated left-hand turns. What he actually said was turn to the left, a phrase that could have been, and indeed was, interpreted as an instruction to turn left immediately, before entering the holding pattern. To this ambiguous instruction, the crew of Dan Air 1008 simply replied, Roger, Dan Air 1008. They did not repeat the instruction back to the controller as a crew would today, as repeating instructions was not a long-established communication protocol at the time. Having acknowledged the instruction, though, the crew were left puzzled. It didn't quite make sense, but they chose to follow the part of it that was clear. Turn left. As they did so, they discussed their confusion over the strange holding pattern. Bloody strange hold, isn't it? Said co-pilot Firth, to which Captain Whelan replied, Yes, it isn't parallel with the runway or anything. At this time, the air traffic controller cleared them to descend to 1,500 meters or 5,000 feet. They did so, before Captain Whelan returned to the topic of the holding pattern and asked, Hey, did he say it was 150 inbound? Inbound should have meant towards the beacon, but they were now flying away from it. Yeah, confirmed co-pilot Firth. Inbound. Well, that is, I don't like that, Captain Whelan said. At this moment, the crew had no idea that they were flying just to the east of Mount La Esperanza. With a heavy fog in the air, visibility was so low that they couldn't see the looming mountain on their right. The first warning they had was when the ground proximity warning alarm began to sound.
Call up. Call up.
This prompted a flurry of activity in the cockpit. Captain Whelan said, Okay, overshoot. He's taking us around to the high ground. The standard protocol when the ground proximity warning begins is to pull up immediately, but Captain Whelan appeared to believe that they were on the north side of the mountain, so initiated a sharp turn to the right instead. This would, in his mind, take them out to sea and away from danger. In reality, they were to the east of the mountain, and this sharp right-hand turn would instead point them directly towards its summit. After completing the turn, there was a brief moment of relief, though, as the ground proximity alarm fell silent. From the point of view of the captain, this only served to confirm the incorrect idea of their location that he had in mind. In reality, the warning had not silenced because the maneuver had taken them away from danger, but instead because the plane had passed over a valley. First Officer Firth seemed uneasy, perhaps suspecting that a mistake had been made. He said, I suggest a heading of 122 actually, and take us through the overshoot. Flight Engineer Carey, equally uneasy, added, Let's get out of here. Firth radioed air traffic control. Dan Air 1008, we've had a ground proximity warning. But it was already too late. The turn to the right had lost them 92 meters or 300 feet of altitude. The plane slammed into the side of La Esperanza head first at an altitude of 1,661 meters or 5,450 feet. Had it retained the altitude it lost during the turn, it would have passed cleanly over the summit. As it was, the high-speed crash completely disintegrated the plane, instantly killing all 146 people on board. There were no witnesses to the crash, but light debris began to rain down on the village of Las Lagunitas, further down the mountain. At the same time, back at the airport, after several calls had gone unanswered, the crash alarm was sounded for the second time in 3 years. Rescuers made it up the mountain within a few hours, but it was immediately apparent that there was no chance of any survivors. They could not locate a single complete human body amongst the remains. Both Spain and the UK participated in an investigation into the crash, and there was some disagreement between the two nations. Spanish investigators concluded that the pilot had caused the accident by taking the aircraft into an area of high terrain and failing to maintain a safe height, and further emphasized that the crew should have asked for clarification if they found air traffic control instructions unclear. British investigators suggested that ambiguous instructions from air traffic control were the most significant factor, and that there had not been enough time for the Dan Air flight to enter the proposed holding pattern safely, even if the crew had fully understood the instructions. The lack of infrastructure, like radar, also played a part in the crash. If the plane's exact whereabouts had been known, the disaster could have been avoided. After the 1977 Tenerife disaster, an investigation had recommended the installation of radar at the airport, but this had not yet been actioned. Investigators agreed that the captain's response to the proximity warning sealed the fate of Flight 1008. He had misjudged where they were, so his decision to turn right took them into the mountain rather than away from it. Had he done nothing at all and waited to gather more information, the plane would not have crashed. Had he followed protocol and taken the plane higher when the warning sounded, the plane would not have crashed. His split-second decision, made in a moment of immense pressure and motivated by a desire to keep the plane and passengers safe, had been the wrong one. After the Dan Air Flight 1008 disaster, the climb immediately policy was reinforced as the correct and only response to a proximity warning. Gradually, the infrastructure of smaller airports like Tenerife was improved, including the addition of radar. After 2 devastating accidents, Los Rodeos has changed in such a way that further crashes are much less likely. Between the Tenerife disaster in 1977 and the crash of Dan Air Flight 1008 in 1988, this safety has come at an immensely high cost.